Hey all, this is Silver Keys here, and today I'm going to be talking about the U.S. Constitution, specifically Amendment 15, the citizen's right to vote. And while I'm talking about this, I'm playing a video of some photographs that I've taken around home here, so I hope you enjoy both. The history of the amendments to the Constitution is, in a sense, a history of the expansion of certain political freedoms, including voting. At the founding of the United States, many groups, including landless white men, slaves, free blacks, and women, could not vote. A lot has changed since then. Almost a third of the amendments added to the Constitution after the Bill of Rights was ratified concern the ability to vote. For example, the 15th Amendment in the 1870s granted the right to vote to former slaves and people of color. It reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." So, yay, right? But while the 15th Amendment barred voting rights discrimination on the basis of race, it left the door open for states to determine specific qualifications for suffrage. Suffrage is the right to vote in political elections. So a lot of southern state legislatures used qualifications like literacy tests, poll taxes, and other discriminatory practices to disenfranchise a majority of black voters in the decades following Reconstruction. As a result of this, the white-dominated state legislatures, consolidated control and effectively reestablished the black codes in the form of so-called Jim Crow laws, which were a system of segregation that would remain in place for nearly a century. So if you've ever heard of Jim Crow laws, that's what that was. In the 50s and 60s, securing the rights for African Americans in the South became focused on voting rights, and that was the Civil Rights Movement. While the sweeping Civil Rights Act of '64 finally banned segregation in the schools and other public places, it did very little to remedy the problem of discrimination in voting rights. The brutal attacks by state and local law enforcement, on hundreds of peaceful protesters led by Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights activists in Selma, Alabama. And if you don't know what that's about, go look up Selma, Alabama, March 1965, and get some education. Those attacks led to some unprecedented attention to the movement for voting rights. And later that year, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the Voting Rights Act, which banned literacy tests and other methods used to disenfranchise voters, especially black voters. In 1966, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Harper versus the Virginia Board of Elections that poll taxes, which the 24th Amendment had eliminated for federal elections in 1964, were unconstitutional for state and local elections as well. People, this was only 56 years ago. So, yeah, crazy. Let's move on to women voting. So after protesting, rallying, and fighting for it, including being jailed, beaten, and sent to prison, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution gave the vote to women. It passed on June 4th, 1919, and was ratified on August 18, 1920. 100 years ago. Just 100 years ago. And it reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." However, again, it didn't immediately provide suffrage, the right to vote, to all women, because women's rights to a public identity were restricted by the common law practice of coverture. As women were not citizens in their own right, and married women were required to assume the citizenship and residency requirements of their spouses, Many women upon marriage had no voting rights. The Naturalization Act of 1790 granted any free white who met character and residency policies the right to become a citizen, and the 14th Amendment extended citizenships to those born in the United States, including African Americans. But rulings by the Supreme Court allowed racial limitations to naturalization of people who were neither black nor white. So this meant that Latinos, Asians, and Eastern Europeans, among other groups, were at various times barred from becoming citizens. Exclusions based on race also applied to Native American women until the passage in 1924 of the Indian Citizenship Act. As a result of this, if an American woman married someone who was ineligible for naturalization until the passage of the Cable Act of 1922 and various amendments, she lost her citizenship and her right to vote. As the U.S. Constitution grants states the ability to determine who is eligible to vote in elections, until the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, legislative variations among states led to extremely different civil rights for women within the federal system, depending upon their residency. Restrictions on literacy, moral character, the ability to pay poll taxes were used to legally exclude women from voting. Large numbers of African American women, as well as men, continued to be denied suffrage in southern states. Latinos and non-English speaking women were routinely excluded by literacy requirements in the northern states, and many poor women had no way to pay a poll tax. Because married women's wages and legal access to money were controlled by their husbands, many married women had no ability to pay poll taxes. In 1940 people, U.S. women were granted their own legal status as citizens, and provisions were made for women who had previously lost their citizenship through marriage to regain it. Read that again. Listen. Women were granted their own legal status just 80 years ago. The 23rd, the 24th, and the 26th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, again dealing with voting, gave representation to the District of Columbia. They forbid poll taxes and lowered the voting age to 18, respectively. The passage of each of these amendments reflected a shift toward making voting a right of all citizens and a fundamental part of citizenship. Practicing your right to vote is one of the most powerful and important things you can do as an American citizen. People, vote. It's your right. Vote. It's so important. I'm going to let this play out to the end of these photos. Enjoy it if you want. I'll turn the music up. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for watching.